David is already ready to present his part of this session. And David is representing Center for International Environmental Law, CL, and the Geneva office. He's managing attorney at this office and director of CL's Environment Health Program. And he used to work with a lot of issues related to public international law, and also cooperated a lot with global organizations and European organizations, as well as with different NGOs. And currently he's also very much involved in United Nations Environmental Assembly work and Basel Convention work related to plastic and chemical pollution. So David will present the developments regarding preparation of United Nations multilateral environmental agreement on marine litter and plastic. So David, the floor is yours.
Yes, I see everybody. Perfect. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. I will now talk to you about using international law to face the global plastic crisis. And while I will indeed focus largely on the UNEA process, I will touch upon a few additional points. So first, just to give you a quick background, plastic is an issue of global concern in that it has a global supply chain, and it has global impact all throughout the life cycle of plastics. And I'll get to this in a moment. And also, in order to better understand the approach and what we're discussing, it is important to take into consideration the fact that virgin plastic production is set to rise by more than 40% in just the next 5 years. And these are not speculation coming out of a deranged eco-warrior information. These figures are actually coming out from the American Chemistry Council and from the producers themselves. And the reason for that is because the virgin resin producers are looking at plastic and petrochemicals in general as a next relay of profit and growth, while the fuel market is coming down. So because of these issues, because it is rising dramatically globally, and because it is a global supply chain with global impact, it does require a global solution. No countries will be able to protect itself or to solve the plastic crisis on its own. Three more quick points before I get into the detail. I want to make it very clear, and I think it was also mentioned, it was also touched upon a little earlier, that as far as we're concerned, plastic is not an ocean crisis. Every single environmental media is currently infested with plastics of all size, shapes, and colors, whether it's the agricultural soil, the air, fresh water, and others. So while a lot of the global discussion are indeed focused on the ocean, it is very important for us all to know that this is not just about the ocean. And there is no way we're going to address the crisis of plastic in the ocean without taking a more global and a more comprehensive approach to plastic. And to plastic pollution. And the other thing that I think is very important to stress is that this is not a waste problem. It is, I mean, we obviously have a plastic waste and a waste problem in general, but it is critical to acknowledge that the impacts of plastic extend way beyond the waste phase of the life cycle. Plastic is made out of petrol and gas mostly, and a little bit of coal in China and in a few other places. And the extraction of these resources already have major impacts on health, on the environment, and on human rights of communities that are being exposed. The transformation of this oil and gas into the plastic resin and the monomers and the toxic additives that go with it also has major impact on the population living around it and the environment. And in fact, a lot of the microbeads pollution that was mentioned before comes from the manufacturing plants and not just from use in cosmetic and elsewhere. There are literally billions of microbeads that are being thrown out into the environment before they even make it into a product. The use of plastic is also a major issue, a health issue. A lot of the toxics that are used as a lot of the additives that are used as toxics for plastic products are problematic for health. And so this is why the approach that we're taking at CL, and also the approach that is garnering a lot of support at the global level, is an approach not just to focus on the ocean and how to prevent the plastic from getting into the ocean, but really to have a comprehensive and global reflection about the plastic life cycle and how that can be addressed. And without spoiling a lot of the information, all of the researchers show that the first thing we should be doing in order to address the plastic crisis is to close the plastic tap, is to close the tap. We're currently overflowing with plastics, and when your house is overflowing, the first thing you do is not take a bucket and empty the water out of your house. You first cut the source, and then you can try to deal with whatever is remaining into the mess that is in your house. So this is really something that I thought was important to mention at the onset of the conversation. Now, there are a number of existing international instruments from the Basel Convention, the International Maritime Organization, the Stockholm Convention, SAICM, and many others that do have a role to play in addressing the plastic crisis. And one example is what happened last year at the COP of the Conference of Parties. I'm sorry for using so many acronyms. The Conference of Parties of the Basel Convention, parties decided to completely change the status of plastic waste trade and of plastic waste that is traded internationally. And that will have a major impact on some of the some aspects of the plastic crisis. But as a major studies has shown that was commissioned by the UN, those existing instruments, even if they're pushed to their limit and to their boundaries, cannot adequately address the plastic crisis. We need something else that will unify the different instruments and that will close all the gaps. We currently don't have an instrument that allows us to address a lot of issues earlier in the plastic life cycle. So this is why there are currently ongoing discussions towards a new global instrument to address plastic pollution throughout its life cycle. And these discussions happen under the authority of the United Nations Environment Assembly, or UNEA. So I will briefly, in the next few slides, I'm going to touch upon briefly about the other processes and how they can be relevant to the global regulation of plastic. And then we'll focus a little more on the specific process that is currently ongoing under the UNEA, and also share with you a few resources to go further or to get a little more involved. So the first of the global policy space that is important to consider is the Basel Convention. The Basel Convention regulates the transboundary movement, so international movement of waste, and in particular of hazardous waste and other waste requiring special attention. And in particular, what it does is that it restricts the movement of waste from the global north, OECD countries, to what we usually refer to as the global south, which is the rest of the world. Now, the limitation of the Basel Convention, as I mentioned before, is that it focuses on waste. And as I mentioned before, just increasing our waste management capacity will not be enough to address the root cause and address all the impacts of the plastic crisis. But it can already do quite a lot. Another issue that we see with the Basel Convention is that it doesn't exclude what we refer to as false solutions, such as incineration, for example. We consider stuff like incineration a false solution to the problem because it creates massive emission of greenhouse gases, because it also sends into the atmosphere and into the soil through the sludge some massive toxic substances, and they're a very costly infrastructure who to function require a steady flow of waste. And so if you build big incinerators like what happened in some places in Europe, you actually need to continue producing a lot of waste rather than try to limit the production of waste, which is the first part of the waste hierarchy. Now, there are limitations, but there are also great opportunities and some reason why this particular instrument is considered as very useful in addressing the plastic crisis. First of all, even though it's not the only aspect of the problem, waste is an important issue. Secondly, the Basel Convention has in its toolbox the capacity, the objective to reduce production at the source. So that is something which hasn't been very effective so far, but does exist, and the Basel Convention contains provisions. Also, it's a very functional and vibrant convention. It is vivid, parties are engaged, it's a near universal international treaty that functions very, very well, and that allows countries who are ambitious into addressing an issue to do something about it, as I mentioned with the amendment that was adopted last year. And there's currently, after this particular amendment, there is quite a lot of momentum and energy going into this. The next convention I want to mention is the Stockholm Convention. That focuses only on a very small portion, a very narrow number of chemical substances, but some of those chemical substances, first of all, those are probably the worst offenders. They're dubbed the worst chemicals in history because they don't degrade, because they're highly toxic, because they accumulate in food chain and in the environment. And some of those POPs, persistent organic pollutants, are actually being used as additives into plastic. And so it is, as we think of trying to address the crisis of plastic, we also need to think not just of the polymer itself, but also of all the additives that make up most of the plastic we currently use. And while on average, those additives represent about 20% by weight of any plastic object, for some types of plastic or some types of objects like PVC, it can go up to 80%. The Stockholm Convention is also quite important because while it is a little slow, it can address real global ban of certain substances. It has a very robust scientific body, and it is also a vibrant convention and coordinates quite efficiently with the Secretariat of the Basel Convention as well as the one from Rotterdam, but that is slightly less relevant for us in this particular issue. Now, a lot of the plastic that we see in the ocean and elsewhere actually has its origin not on land, but on the sea itself, through fishing gears or through cruise ships and other. And in that respect, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, which deals with ports and maritime sources of pollution, as well as dumping from ships, fishing gear, etc., has a major role to play to limit ocean pollution in general. It is not very well equipped to address land-based sources of marine litter, but as I said, addressing some of the marine sources could already go quite a long way, and every effort counts. So there are ongoing opportunities because there are currently work plans that are being developed under the IMO to address exactly this, the fishing gear and port reception facilities, which are very relevant in trying to address the crisis. And also there are different political dynamics in IMO, because in IMO countries, the weight of countries relates to the size of their exclusive oceanic zone. So some very small countries like Tuvalu are actually some very big players as opposed to what we see in other spaces. And so that creates also a number of opportunities. Now, I want to move on and speak to you about UN MEA now. And as I mentioned before, UN MEA is relevant, first of all, because it is the governing body of UNEP. UNEP is the United Nations Environment Program. And UN MEA will be the primary space where all the threads that I mentioned before about the waste issue, about the maritime issue, about possibly agricultural issues and use of plastic, and all the other thread of the plastic crisis will be woven together to try to address the crisis in a comprehensive and global level. At least this is the objective, and we believe that UN MEA is relatively well equipped to do this. Now, under UNEA, ocean plastic and microplastic has been an issue since the creation of UNEA about 5 or 6 years ago. And thanks to Norway pushing for this issue, a number of resolutions have already been adopted that recognize the need to take a life cycle approach, that recognize the need to support countries to develop their national initiatives, and quite a number of also good practices in terms of measurements, methodology, and others that do need to happen to allow the global community to move forward. At UNEA 3, that was in 2016, no, in December 2017, I'm sorry, there was the creation of what is called an open-ended expert group. And this is a space for experts that are nominated by all countries and stakeholders to come together and discuss what is the extent of the crisis, what is the definition of the problem, and what is currently being done, how it could be addressed. I mean, the mandate of this expert group is quite large and has been updated also in the latest UNEA resolution. There were two meetings of the expert group between UNEA 3 and UNEA 4, which was not enough because a very small number of countries have been opposing any advances on the global space to address plastic pollution. And it probably won't come as a surprise to you if I tell you that the one country leading the charge against the global community taking action is a very large country located somewhere between Canada and Mexico. It was supported by a very small number of other countries, including Saudi Arabia. And what we're seeing here in the dynamic in UNEA is a very, very, very large mobilization of almost all regions in the world, except a very small number of countries, in support of creating a new instrument. There are different ideas about what this new instrument could be. If you're interested, I invite you to reach out to me because Ciel, together with a number of its partners, EIA, the Environmental Investigation Agency, the MEA University in New Zealand, the Break Free from Plastic Movement, and others, have put forward a thought starter about how a future global treaty or global convention could be organized to have a chance to fully address the question of plastic. So this is moving on. And there were 3 meetings of the expert group that were planned between UNEA 4 last year and UNEA 5 that is supposed to take place in 2021. But of course, with the current crisis, some of those meetings have been postponed, moved around. So there was one expert group meeting that took place in Bangkok at the end of last year that allowed us to put together a work plan and a timeline for how we would advance towards UNEA 5. Now, obviously, with the COVID crisis, a lot of this has been moved online. There was an expert group meeting that was supposed to take place in Peru in May, which was delayed to we're not quite sure when. But in the meantime, the secretariat of the expert group has put together a very rich and quite intense program of webinars, consultation, and virtual discussion to advance the case and to ensure that we don't lose another minute or another month, because the crisis is very urgent. And every week we spend and we lose not moving towards a global solution, the situation gets worse and the situation becomes more intractable. So all these engagement currently going on. There may be a final meeting to take place of the expert group before UNEA to take place in Rwanda in November, or at least sometimes in the Northern Hemisphere winter of 2020. All of this will be leading to UNEA 5, the big meeting that is now currently still supposed to take place in February in Nairobi, Kenya. And there we are hoping to see all countries come together and decide to to create a mandate to start negotiating a new treaty. We've seen calls, just to be clear, we've seen calls for such a new treaty arising from the African region at ministerial level, from the Caribbean region, from the Nordic Council, from some Asia Pacific country, from the EU, etc. So really what we're seeing is a massive, massive movement in favor of this, but this is international law and that requires some consensus. So we need to work with those that are still opposing, and we need to collect all the information that is needed. Although one of the things that was relatively clear from the work of the expert group is that we currently have enough information to know that we cannot wait any more time to start acting at the global level. So briefly, this is just a collection of some of the logos of the organization we work with. You'll recognize a number that are here, and there are many, many more, but it's just to show and express that the movement that is currently going on among civil society as well as among government is extremely large. We're seeing environmental groups, indigenous peoples groups, workers groups, human rights groups, all coming together to try to address this particular challenge of the plastic solution, because there is an opportunity and there is the sense that this is something that we can reach. A global treaty will not be a silver bullet perfect solution. Once it's adopted, we have no more problem, but at least it will take us a long way towards addressing this issue. This is a list of resources. I will share the slide before, so you don't have to copy all of them, but you'll see quite a number of reports, as well as newsletters and guidelines and position paper that have been put together by the coalition that I mentioned, that I just presented in the previous slides, for you to further engage. There are also some contact detail of people focusing on specific processes. So please do feel free to reach out again, and I very much look forward to discussing this with you all. Thank you very much.